Hello, fans, and welcome to the MMA Discussion Podcast. I am your co-host, John Franklin from Combat Press, and I am joined by the founder of the MMA Discussion Movement from MMAOutsiders.com, Nick Peralta. On this episode of the MMA Discussion Podcast, we cover all the relevant topics in MMA, including but not limited to the sale of the UFC, Conor McGregor, recaps of UFC Fight Night 87 and Invicta 17, a preview of Saturday's UFC 198, and with all that, let me bring in the co-host of the big show, Nick Peralta. Nick, how are you?
What's up, man? Oh, man. It has been wild this week. Sheesh.
Right. It would be a big week if we were just recapping UFC Fight Night 87, Invicta 17, and previewing UFC 198, but there is so much more to talk about. So let's get into it. Let's start with the UFC sale. The UFC is reportedly from several outlets, MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, ESPN. They've all reported the UFC is in talks to be sold. The Fertitta brothers are in those negotiations now. The price tag is $4 billion on a $2 million investment, which is quite an ROI. You don't have to be a business major to know that. A couple of points of contention to that. Well, let's first start with this. The UFC is for sale. Again, the price tag is $4 billion allegedly. Part of the sticking point of the sale is that the potential buyers do not want Dana White in his current capacity moving forward. Now, the latest on this is that ESPN is reporting that Dana White has come out and said the rumors of the sale are completely false, and obviously everything that associated with that is completely false. Nick, first, how did you feel when you first heard this news? And secondly, what is your reaction to all this?
Well, I mean, I thought it was kind of outlandish, honestly. I don't know if I don't know why the need to sell it would be now. I've never really heard the any of those guys speak openly about it. I mean, I guess I can't figure that they would, but when it comes to selling it, I would think maybe you'd want to get more out of it than $4 billion. But at the same time, I'm not really good with financial figures. I can't really understand the necessity for that specific price point, $2 to $4 billion, as I've heard. But I think it'd be crazy. And it kind of gets people thinking, like, just think about the UFC without Dana White, without the Fertitta brothers. I mean, you got to think, a lot of people certainly have a lot of grinds to gear with the UFC these days, such as the Reebok deal, the payment of fighters, a bunch of other things. But you wonder, and especially if you look at the potential buyers, as we saw in the report, which is like some Chinese company out in New York. Just some companies that they barely kind of reach the realm of sports at all. I mean, maybe one of those buyers, I believe, owns like a soccer league. Other than that, the other ones, you wonder, like, what really, what do they need to own the UFC for, really, kind of deal, So then I look at it like, well, man, if it was owned by somebody else, how would they treat it differently, or what's there to be had? And what if they, just kind of rickshawed the whole thing, and maybe MMA takes a dive because of the fact that the biggest promotion in the world is now being owned by somebody that maybe doesn't have MMA's best interests and maybe just wants to exploit it for some kind of short-term goal. You know what I mean? This is definitely a sport that bridges outside of the UFC, but definitely if the UFC wasn't managed correctly, MMA certainly wouldn't be portrayed as big as it is today. You know what I mean? It certainly wouldn't be cool if it took a dive in success just based off of a new owner. And you have companies like Bellator and World Series of Fighting that could certainly build off of that, but at the same time, the sport as a whole would take a hit. And it really makes you think about how much, when it comes to the UFC, what they've done, and what, of course, we all have our issues and our problems with the UFC. We don't like it. We don't like how everything is being won 100%. But it really makes you consider, man, maybe it could be worse.
I agree. I agree with all that. So here's a few things that I'll say just on the things that you said. So number one, what they're saying is part of the reason why they're looking to sell now is because of all the money they're making off Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor. The valuation of the UFC may never be higher based on just the type of numbers they've brought in. So that's number one. Number two, we don't really know, Nick, to what extent that running the UFC is a pain in the ass to the Fertitta brothers. There's a lot of things that are involved with sort of dealing with, these are some sort of these are high maintenance employees they have, and I think that could be an issue. You'd like to think it isn't, but more to your point that you said that fascinates me about this whole thing, there may be some things that would happen because Dana White's not in power. Maybe for guys like you and I, maybe there'd be a different structure as far as access to the media. Maybe there'd be, but you're right, they could run into the ground in the sense that there are things that we've just sort of accepted from the UFC that if Dana White and the Fertitta brothers weren't there, it may change. Co-promotion. They might all of a sudden, they could be purchased by someone who would want to co-promote with Ryzen or M1 or any of those kind of, Bellator for that matter. So you're right, once they sell, and you don't really know 100% who you're selling to, it's sort of everything's on the table. So I would be interested to see, let me ask you this, you think if they polled fans and the question was if the sale of the UFC, not that they would want the sale of the UFC to be to go through, but do you think fans would want Dana White to stay in power or in his current position one way or the other? Well, how do you think fans would vote?
Well, I mean, because I don't think many fans have been thinking it the way that I just kind of laid it all out. I think fans are just thinking of the short term, like, oh, maybe they'll get rid of Reebok or they'll do this or do that or get rid of Dana. We hate Dana. And then there's some fans that there's been a few fans, not the majority at all, have come out and said, okay, well, we appreciate what Dana's done. And if they were gone, who knows what could happen. And then sure enough, that gets you thinking. And, I think if they pulled fans, who knows? I mean, I really, when you think of a large scale group like hardcore fans of MMA, if they all polled, who knows? I mean, and that could be 50-50 really. Cause you could get like a lot of different perspectives and opinions on it. And I really don't think it's something, when you think of how the UFC is run and how a lot of people wish it was run differently, or if they prefer it the way that it is, I'm sure you have a lot of different opinions. So it'd be really hard, I think. I don't think you'd get like a legitimate answer, but I mean, I could be surprised. Maybe like the majority would be like, yeah, get rid of the Dana White. He's this, he's awful, he's all that kind of stuff. Or a lot of people would come out and say, who knows? I mean, you really just don't know. I honestly, from what I've gathered today, I've gotten a lot more, oh, yeah, sell it and get rid of Dana and this, that, and the other. But at the same time, this is just hours after hearing it.
And, I think fans have a love-hate relationship with Dana. I think that sometimes they don't like everything he does. They don't like how he either says, this is how it is, take it or leave it, it's whatever, my way or the highway kind of thing. They don't like that. But then, he's brought us fans of MMA a lot of stuff. I mean, the difference between MMA largely and boxing is that we get the fights that we want for the most part. So, it'll be interesting to see how things go moving forward and how this whole thing plays out. And one of the main things that has the UFC valuation so high as Conor McGregor. We would be remiss, Nick, if we didn't do our weekly Conor McGregor update. We start if we started the last several podcasts, the subject of Conor McGregor, the Irishman, continues to loom large on the MMA landscape as well now in the boxing landscape. This week in the lead up to the Canelo Alvarez Amir Khan fight, Khan said that if he were to transition to MMA, that he would be open to fight with McGregor. In boxing news, Floyd Mayweather jumped on the McGregor PR bandwagon and said that he would be open to a boxing match with the UFC featherweight champion. On both fronts, it seems the boxers are using McGregor's name to promote themselves further. Nick, let's start the Conor McGregor discussion this week by asking, do you give any credibility to the rumored fights with Khan or Mayweather?
Not at all. I can't. Not really. First of all, if there's one thing that Dana would say that I'd buy is that he's not letting somebody fight a boxer in a boxing fight. He's never let that happen before, and I'm pretty sure he wouldn't make the exception even for McGregor. So, I don't think that would happen. It's certainly got a lot of fans buzzing though, and I'm sure that's the desired result from Conor, and it's a good way of keeping himself relevant, especially when you're putting yourself next to a name like Floyd Money Mayweather.
I agree. I think that, so a couple other things to do with Conor McGregor. The interesting thing that I heard this week that came out of MMA, the MMA landscape, I guess, is Brendan Schaub says he thinks Dana would let it happen. He thinks that Dana would let it happen because he thinks that the type of eyes that it would bring to the UFC product. Listen, you could make an argument that if you're Dana and you let, now, the issue with it would be how do you make money off of it if you're Dana? But the Conor fighting Floyd may very well be a way for him to go get humbled and then come back, and it changes the price point for him vis-a-vis the UFC. So I don't know how much Dana is into humbling Conor McGregor in this whole process. I don't think that he wants to anger him too much because he makes him a lot of money. Joe Rogan said this week that Conor got into a pissing contest with the UFC and lost. Joe Rogan also said that he thought Conor McGregor could go the distance with Floyd Mayweather. So Joe's made some statements this week. I don't know how much I buy into him, but he certainly said a lot. The other piece of Conor McGregor sort of ancillary news I'll throw at you, and we'll get your last word on it, was Tito Ortiz said this week that Conor McGregor should sort of take a lesson from him and understand that you just don't know. You just don't go against the UFC. It's better to just sort of go along and play ball. So talk to me a little about Tito's comments and Rogan's. What do you think?
Well, I mean, as far as if he fought Mayweather, I mean, him going to the distance isn't the craziest thing you could say. But at the same time, I mean, it would be, I don't know, it'd be a weird fight, man. I'd have to watch more of Floyd's latest fights and you know, just to get a feel of how Conor might do. But I certainly don't think that he'd beat Mayweather at all. But as far as their comments regarding him in the UFC, it makes sense. I mean, as we said, and I've been saying, and I mean, like, it still confuses me. I don't understand what benefit he thought he had in continuing his stance with saying, I don't need to do promotion, or I should get leeway because, you know, I've done so much for this company and da 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 da. So I agree with them on that front, and you know, as I said, in the end result, there's really nothing going for him. He has no fight coming up, and he might have marred his relationship with the UFC. So moving forward, he's probably not going to get that kind of leeway that we've kind of gotten used to seeing him get. Like, he asked for a lightweight title shot without defending his belt once and got it. And then, of course, we were thinking if he beat Nate Diaz, he'd probably be in the main event of UFC 200 facing Robbie Lawler right now. That's how that event could have looked if he'd have beat Nate Diaz at 196. And that's only because that's all he would have had to do is ask, because that's how big of a star he was. And then he does something that the UFC just, you know, takes a firm stance on and saying, no, you got to do promoting. And it's 3 months out. It's not that crazy of an errand to ask you to do for us. So at the end of the day, I certainly don't get it, and I definitely think that Rogan and Ortiz has a first-person perspective on this whole thing. You know, I mean, you know, he tried the whole bad boy thing with Dana, and it certainly hasn't helped him. Anybody that's really gone up against Dana, I mean, Dana just trash talks you into the mat, into submission, man. He just with fuck yous and you're a fucking scumbag and you're this and you're that and you know, all this shit. I mean, when has it ever benefited anybody that's ever done that, gone up against Dana in that kind of way? You know what I mean? Frank Shamrock certainly hasn't benefited him. Don Fry, he's never gonna probably be in the Hall of Fame because of it. So it's just a bunch of nonsense when it comes to when it came to McGregor. So I definitely agree with them. And as far as if that fight were to ever happen, I really don't think it would. But if it happened, that'd be one of the biggest things ever. But at the same time, I think they'd be trying, like, because of the way boxing works these days when it comes to negotiating contracts and like when it comes to negotiating who gets paid what and gets this much a pay-per-view and this and that. There's so much politics in boxing when it comes to matchmaking these days that a lot of really good matchups that should happen really don't. That's one of the biggest problems in boxing when it comes to Triple G and Canelo Alvarez right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I'll agree on a lot of fronts. I think that Dana, he's out there, man. You know, he throws these bombs, and it's. I think that Rogan is correct in that Conor really misjudged how Dana was going to react. Now, with that being said, I think that you know, the fascinating thing for me about what Conor did is Conor has almost got his profile as high as Ronda Rousey's, and he's only done it in fighting. He has nothing outside of fighting. He doesn't have like a sort of a women's movement type of thing. He's not getting name dropped at Beyonce concerts. He's not getting, he's not an entourage. He's had none of that stuff left, and he's had none of that stuff yet, and he still has a super high profile. So I think that, again, I've said this before, and you and I sort of don't see eye to eye on this, but I think there should be a different set of rules for Conor because he's sort of changed the game a little bit. So that's just my take. All right, let's move on. UFC Fight Night 87 was in Rotterdam, Netherlands for a card with all kind of heavyweight title implications potentially, as Alistair Overeem defeated Jackson Winklejohn teammate Andrei Arlovsky. In the co-main event, Stefan Struve annihilated Bigfoot Silva. Let's start the UFC Fight Night discussion by asking, what did this night mean for the heavyweight division, Nick?
I mean, it really pushed forward two Netherlands heavyweights that just looked fantastic, man. And you know, I'm a biased Struve fan. I think he's amazing. I've always loved the heart that guy has when he fights. And you know, generally, I was very skeptical of him going into this fight facing Bigfoot. You know, because Bigfoot, when he's a guy on top of you, man, he's not a dude you want on top of you, okay? So I thought that Bigfoot had a good chance of getting on top of him and probably putting Struve in a very bad situation in that fight. But, I mean, he got hit with such a good, you know, it kind of looked like an underhook, which was really impressive because it's the same kind of punch McGregor landed on Aldo that Struve threw and landed on Bigfoot that really, you know, obviously had Bigfoot staggering, where he went for this takedown that put him in a position where he was getting elbowed in the side of the dome numerous times. The ref felt the need to stop it. And after you see, you know, at first I was thinking like, oh man, that might have been too early, but then you see Bigfoot's reaction and you could probably justify that he was certainly almost out of it. So Struve looked fantastic, and I mean, if you want me to break down that Overeem fight, you let me know, because there's a lot that I really need to say about that matchup.
Yeah, let's move on to some of the other stuff. I want to talk real quick about the heavyweight fighters, and then we'll get back to Overeem in a sec, because he's the big name moving forward. Let's talk real quick about Andrei Arlovsky and Bigfoot Silva, and I'll ask this question in a really simple way. Nick, are they done?
Arlovsky, no. I mean, as far as can he fight for the title again, it certainly has never looked dimmer since he came back to the UFC. Or it's probably just about where people might have thought he was when he came back to the UFC. I think he's back at you know, ground zero when it comes to where he was coming into the UFC. A lot of people didn't think he'd ever fight for the title, and now I think he's right back in that spot. It's not impossible, but it certainly seems so unlikely at this point. And Bigfoot Silva, man, he's 1-5 and 1 no contest in his last 7 fights. That's bad. And his only win is against Saul Paleli, who's now retired. So, you know, that's a terrible, you know. I mean, and then the one fight where he showed any durability was a no contest fight where he fought Mark Hunt, and a fight that, you know, certainly is questionable because he tested positive for high testosterone and stuff in that fight. And you know, so I don't know what's next for that guy, but I mean, he really needs to kind of, if he doesn't get cut, he certainly needs to work his way back from the bottom. Like, you know, just kind of take a step back, work your way back up. You know, I mean, he really needs to take a very large step back in competition just to see if he's even still got it. You know, if he's still got the talent and skill to compete with the best heavyweights in the world. So as far as Bigfoot, I think it's very probable that he's on the downslope of his career.
For some housekeeping here, the performances of the night: Alistair Overeem, $50,000 for him; Stefan Struve, $50,000 for him; Gunnar Nelson beat Albert Tumanov, choked him out; and Jermaine de Ramadi had a performance of the night as well. Back into the discussion, moving this thing forward. Obviously, Gunnar Nelson looks super impressive. Talk a little about Gunnar and talk a little about Alistair moving forward. And what I really want you to touch on with Alistair is, what did you see in this fight that either makes you feel better about him, you know, maybe contending for the title again, or makes you think there's no change in his title hopes?
I think, you know, okay, well, as far as Gunnar goes, Gunnar looked amazing. I mean, he looked like the high profile fighter, the guy who had all this potential, the guy who everybody was talking about just a year ago, you know, before he lost to Rick, or I guess 2 years ago, before he lost to Rick Story, before he lost to Damian Maia. He was the guy. He was this up-and-coming guy who just looked fantastic, who had this unorthodox striking style and this very dangerous ground game. And I don't think he's ever lost that. I just think the step up in competition of who he faced, and also stylistically, Rick Story was a very dangerous matchup for him in that he was a very grinding wrestler who could really stifle his ground game, which of course at the same time takes away his striking, which a lot of people had a hard time have thus far still had a hard time dealing with. Now he was fighting Albert Tumanov, who of course had fantastic boxing, and a lot of people were thinking, okay, well, if Albert can keep it standing, he probably wins this fight. And even still, Gunnar looked great on the feet too. He was able to close distance very well. Landed some terrific strikes from the outside, mainly punches, which was even more impressive, and kept Albert guessing. And of course, after the first takedown, you could just tell, like, oh man, this might be a different kind of fight, and because of for anybody that was picking Albert to win, because of the fact that Gunnar got him down so effortlessly, and then passed and got to mount and just worked his ground game, easily. I mean, it didn't look like it was something so tough for Gunnar to do. He had a very novice time of getting to the mount and just working whatever he wanted to do. Of course, in the second round, when he got a takedown again, got to the mount again, simple as pie, worked the choke, and that was it. And Gunnar made Albert look like he wasn't in his league. That's how good he looked. So, and that tells you a lot, because Albert just entered the rankings. He's been on a 5-fight win streak. He's looked pretty good leading up to this fight, and he just dismantled Albert. So that was a fantastic fight. Now, moving on to Alistair Overeem in this fight, I mean, when you think about where Alistair is, you have to look at the streak he's on. 4 fights, 3 knockouts, 2 in the first round, or 2 in the second round, sorry. I think when Alistair came in to the UFC, a lot of people had this thought process about Alistair, like, man, this guy's in shape, he's a great striker, he's got all these submissions too, so his ground game is severely underrated, and this and that, and he's got knees, he's got this, he's got that. He was really, coming into the UFC, thought to be like the next coming of the heavyweight division, like this is the guy that's going to lead the charge of the heavyweight division, and so and then of course he had those problems with drug testing and the TUE kind of controversy that stopped him from getting a title shot at the all heavyweight 146 card, and just a bunch of things going on that really didn't need to happen. And so, of course, that really held him back because he was suspended. He missed a lot of fight time. But now, if you look at the fights that he's been having, the fight against Stefan Struve, he used smart, intelligent game plan in taking Stefan Struve down, working that brutal ground and pound that he has, those incredible hammer fists of his. And then in the next fight, Roy Nelson showed amazing patience, didn't engage with him, didn't allow himself to be put in dangerous situations where he would, of course, be open to getting knocked out by the crazy right hand of Roy Nelson. Then you move on to, and he utilized the clinch really well in that fight too. Whenever he did close distance and he did engage with Roy Nelson, he would use the knee, or he would use knees in the clinch, not as dangerously as we would see him do so in the past, but he was utilizing it then. Then you move on to the Junior Dos Santos fight, and that was a big eye-opener because he was being patient, he was being methodical, he was being very technical, and he was, not putting himself in any dangerous situations to where Junior could catch him or do any damage to him unless Junior charged him against the cage. And even then, he was good at circling out or closing distance and, again, engaging in the clinch and threatening with those knees that really got Junior to bounce off. And then, in this fight, he utilized the clinch again to create distance whenever he closed in and just didn't have enough space to land anything significant, would clinch up and push away. And so we've mildly been seeing that clinch game that he's so famous for before coming into the UFC. He's just been using it in a defensive manner more than anything else. And man, he's just mixing it up so well, being so patient. He's reading his opponents well. He's doing everything that a really high level striker does. And it shows, because who's comfortable throwing a crane kick, left hook combination like that's just something you do all the time? You know what I mean? He lands. He made Mr. Miyagi proud. That was ridiculous. That was an amazing combination that I think is one of the best we've seen out of any heavyweight this whole year, hands down. And just throughout all those 4 fights, you look at them, you just see the improvement. Not only the improvement in his physical skills, but in his mental warfare. You know what I mean? Because he's fighting so much more intelligently than I think he ever has. And I think that right now, I think this is possibly the best version of Alistair Overeem we've ever seen. And a lot of people are critiquing his physique because he doesn't look as muscular. He doesn't look as like shredded as he used to, and that could have been because of the drugs he was taking. He might have been on some stuff, or it could have been because of the horse meat. Who the hell knows? But it has not stopped him from progressing as a fighter. And so I think that really shows you that his work at Greg Jackson's is paying off very well for him. And it might be awkward for him the next few months fighting at Greg Jackson's, knowing he knocked out one of their favorites there. But you can't deny the progress. And I think that has insurmountably put him at the top of this titanic mountain that is his, his potential. His potential has always been so high because of how well in shape he is, because of his size, because of his physical attributes, and he's just been putting it all together so well. And when you look at the heavyweight division, the only other contender that could have been up there with him is Ben Rothwell. And Ben Rothwell got upset by Junior Dos Santos just last month, so he's out of the running now. A lot of people have been arguing with me that Cain Velasquez is next. And I say, no, don't do that, because think about this. Cain has only fought once in the last 3 years. That is crazy. Once in the last 3 years, and in his last 5 has fought only 2 of the same opponents. And if he fights Travis Brown and he wins, well, that's good. But look at all the injuries the guy's had. A back injury, a shoulder injury, a knee injury. Those are severe injuries that could end up in the long term really affecting Cain's career. And in the short term too, possibly as well. So I think that for Cain, I think if the UFC wants to stay keeping their heavyweight division like in high profile, you kind of want to make sure Cain can compete at a level and at a consistent level to where he's not getting injured all the time. You got to kind of fight a few times to prove that. I think after Brown, he needs to fight a couple more, 1 or 2 more, and then get the title shot. And so if that if that were to be the case, Alistair's the only guy left standing, and he looked fantastic, and he's such a sellable guy for sure. So I don't see what other argument that there could be that Alistair isn't next in line. 4 wins, 2 against top 10 guys, and 3 finishes. The guy, you can't, and he, like I said, he's not lost his cocky charisma yet. He's still out there calling out, saying what he's gonna do. I'm gonna go after that belt. I'm gonna get that belt. I'm gonna defend it defend it in a Netherlands arena. That's awesome. That's definitely something that you can sell. He's a guy that sells. He's a guy that looks amazing. He's got an amazing highlight reel. There's so not an argument to be made for him not being the next heavyweight in line for the title.
Being said, here's the argument for him not being the next heavyweight in line for the title. The argument for him not being the next heavyweight in line for the title is they're scared about the drug failures in the past. And you don't want your heavyweight champion to pop for drugs and you lose him for a year. So I'm not saying that he'd be the first guy that's ever. They try and steer away from that a little bit. They sort of make it so that the guys that are fighting for belts are largely clean fighters. I'm not saying he's not a clean fighter now. I think one thing that's forgotten about with Alistair Overeem is if you remove all the quote unquote alleged drugs that he's taken to get the physique that he had, it's horse meat, it's drugs, whatever. Let's say he's popped, so let's say that he was on some stuff. Take that away, he's still a hell of a talented fighter. So if he had a talent level before that, took the drugs and then just got yoked to the gills, like he looked like the biggest man you've ever seen in your life, got Ariane Celeste falling apart at the weigh-ins, and then now he's off of it, right? He's still the same talented guy. Everything that you're saying about him is true. Everything that he has the capability to do, all the skill set, all that stuff is still there. But the fact that he's a little reserved occasionally, and the fact that the UFC isn't, jumping over themselves to promote him and put him as the next title contender may have to do with the drug use. So it may be a little bit of, not karma, but it may have sort of be the thing that made him who he was, and now it's getting in his way. All right, let's move on. The Invicta 17 took place Saturday night in the OC. A couple of titles were on the line. Tanya Evinger kept hers. Angela Hill took Livia Hanata Souza's. Nick, you were on hand for this card. Let's start the discussion of Invicta 17 with what you saw in first the main and then the co-main.
The main? Okay, well, the main was, there was no surprise there. I broke this fight down on MMA Outsiders, and it went exactly as I thought it would. Tanya Evinger, man, is, like I said, she is a maniacal fighter when it comes to pressure. She will not let up. No matter what you're doing, you can land head kicks, you can throw push kicks, you can throw all this fancy stuff at her. She's not going to stop coming forward. She's not going to get scared of what you have to offer because she doesn't care. She comes at you thinking, well, here's what I'm about to do, so you do something about it. That's her mindset the entire time she is in there fighting you. She never once contemplates what it is her opponent's going to do. She just does what she needs to do. And from a mental standpoint, that is so important for almost every fighter needs to have that. Every fighter needs to only consistently think about what it is they're doing and making sure that their opponent doesn't do anything else because of what they're doing. And that is exactly how Tanya fights. And she did that all 25 minutes of this fight. Came forward, pressured her, pushed off any kicks, shrugged off any punches that were landed, and just kept coming forward. Kept putting her to the cage, kept putting her back to the mat, and just looked phenomenal. And so, you know, I mean, it was technically her first time defending her title. It was her second fight as the champion due to her last opponent not making weight, so it wasn't a title fight. And, you know, again, she wasn't happy with her performance because she wanted the finish, but I think as far as performances go, that was one of her best. I mean, like I said, she's fought some high-quality opponents like Edion Gomez. She submitted her in the first round. That's insane. She's now won 6 straight in Invicta. She looks fantastic. A lot of people want to say, hey, maybe she could go to the UFC next. That'd be crazy if she did. I think right now she's really starting to build her brand, so I think a couple more fights in Invicta would do her well, just so she can continue to, you know, be profiled as this champion, as this person who's beaten all comers and stuff. So I think staying in Invicta probably works best for her. Now in the co-main event, fight of the night worthy fight in my opinion, because Livia Renata Souza took on Angela Hill. Now this was touted from me as a grappler versus striker matchup because Livia said coming into this fight that she could handle herself on the feet with Angela Hill, and I wasn't buying it. And sure enough, that's exactly how the fight ended up turning out. Olivia found out pretty quick that that she couldn't get on, you know, she couldn't land anything significant on Angela Hill. Angela had great footwork. I mean, good footwork for you know, for a striker of her caliber to be in Muay Thai. She showed amazing footwork, getting away from anything too dangerous from Souza. Got on the inside whenever she wanted to, established the jab really well. Angela dealt with some controversy because Livia did get her down a few times in the opening rounds, 1 and 2. And you know, threatened with some deep submissions, a guillotine on numerous occasions, and you know, of course, tried attacking the arm on one occasion. She was trying to be relentless, but Hill, you could just tell, was ready. She was ready, man. I mean, this was her fight. You could just tell everything that she needed to do leading up to this fight. She got done in the gym. She did in her training camp and came into this fight ready 100%. And then the closing rounds, 3, 4, and 5, as this one went the distance, Angela was just all fire on the feet. She landed great knees in the clinch. She, you know, again, wouldn't let Souza get comfortable at all. Continued pressuring her. Didn't let her get used to anything. Didn't let any of her significant strikes land. I mean, Hill fought one of her best fights in the short career that she's had. This is certainly one that stands out.
So just to give fans kind of some perspective, and even me too, I mean, we've talked in the past, you're certainly a lot more plugged in with Invicta than I am. And so if Tanya Evinger were to go to the UFC, where do you think she'd be ranked in the bantamweight division?
I think she should immediately be like top 15. Okay. Easy.
But not like she's not. So if I'm making a list, she's not better than Kat Zingano. She's not better than obviously Misha, but not Holly Holm, not Ronda Rousey.
She's probably like at 9 or 10. Or,
okay. All right.
Probably around there.
All right, so what else did you like? I mean, obviously, Evinger went for it there in the post-fight, didn't she? I mean, can we agree on that?
Oh, man, that was I couldn't believe it when I saw it, and I was just like, what in the world? And I was, you know, what was it? I had Fight Pass on my computer right there, and it was on delay, of course, because it says live, but it's always like a minute late. So I immediately pulled my laptop out and I had to see it again to make sure that like we actually saw what we saw, because I was surrounded by a bunch of the media members by the table that were like, did that just happen? And I was like, we got to see that again. So we all bundled by my computer, like, that is no way that happened. Sure enough, that happens. I mean, that was pretty crazy. I was laughing at how the commentator was like, "Oh man, Tanya might be in trouble for that. She's married, you know," and we're all just laughing because we're like, "That is insane. That's pretty crazy." And I actually got a chance to talk with Tanya after the event, and you know, she's just like, "I just wanted to. She's kind of hot." That was her quote. I asked her, like, why'd you do that? She's like, she's just kind of hot. That's all she gave me. I was just laughing.
Yeah.
I thought that was amazing. Yeah, that's all she said. That was her answer. She just looked me dead in the eye and just stops. I was like, you're not going to explain? That's all you got? That's just it? And,
Well,
I mean,
listen. At the end of the day, that's all she needs. I mean, you could do a lot worse than Lauren Sanko. You know what I mean?
Oh, man,
Plus,
for
she just
sure.
won her fight.
Yeah.
You know, that's the cool thing about
God.
being the champ and winning your fight. You kind of everything's on the table for you.
That was an amazing way to cap off the show, hands down. I mean, what else would you? I mean, if there's anything that's going to bring more male audience to watch Invicta, it's that to close out a show.
That's true. Go ahead.
Oh, well, I mean, as far you asked me, what I thought about the rest of the card, and if there were two fighters that I could say that really just hammered down on on how great this card was. It was, as I said, the featherweights. The featherweights on this card delivered. I mean, man, and I got to tell you, I was feeling LaToya Walker coming into this because she's a former wrestler, Olympic wrestler, and I thought that she'd be able to do really well in this. And she was undefeated, 5-0 coming into this fight with Charmaine Tweet. And Charmaine Tweet, man, first of all, they were trading. I mean, it was a slugfest. And they were just going after each other. I mean, LaToya was pressuring her against the cage and using dirty boxing really effectively, too. And Charmaine Tweet, whenever she creates space, landed some great strikes from the outside. And then, sure enough, man, lands a spinning back fist. I mean, it was amazing, that knockout specifically. And I thought that, Tweet did an amazing job handling herself in that high presser situation. And here's who I really thought was I was most looking forward to this fighter on the entire card, next to Angela Hill and Tanya Evinger, was Megan Anderson, who fought Amanda Bell. And, Megan Anderson, I think, with some time, with a few more fights, with some good experience against some good fighters, I think that she could be a really high-level competitor in the very shallow featherweight division. I mean, she's already highly ranked because look at all her. I mean, she has a really good highlight reel. She's 6-3 now with a lot of good knockouts already, and knocked out Amanda Bell in the opening round with with this significant flurry that involved body kicks and punches against the kicks. She was an animal, man. And I really enjoyed her performance as well. The featherweights delivered as well as the champions and the championship bouts.
Yeah, it was a good night for Invicta. I mean, obviously, the Fight Pass thing seems to be working out. They went viral with, these kind of things help, Nick. They went viral with the Kiss, so it kind of brought attention to the card overall. It was a good card, so if you're going to bring attention to a card, better it be a good one than a bad one. And I think it was a good night for Invicta. All right, moving on. Let's start to get into some of these previews.
Yes.
UFC this weekend goes to Curitiba, Brazil for UFC 198, an absolutely stacked card. Some are billing the Brazilian UFC 200. It took a hit today as Anderson Silva withdrew because he may need gallbladder surgery. Let's start the UFC 198 discussion by asking, how much does Anderson dropping out diminish this card in your eyes?
I mean, it was already a stacked card, and I said it from the get-go. Even if you take one of these fight cards off, minus the main event, mind you, that is still be a fantastic card. It certainly still is. But, man, Anderson was a big draw for this card, for sure. And to not be able to fight at home in Curitiba, I'm sure hurts him. I'm sure that wasn't an easy decision to make. And it had to have been that significant if he couldn't get past it. And, I mean, he might have to get gallbladder surgery. So, I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If that's really the case, then, of course, there's no way there could have been any exception that he could have made to fight this fight. This could have been weeks out, and he still probably wouldn't have been able to fight. So the timing's terrible. It really is. I mean, I was actually getting more and more pumped up for that fight as the days were going by, and I was watching all the breakdowns and the countdown video and everything. So I'm really bummed that happened. And so, from what I understand, they might actually show some more visual information on this whole thing on the Embedded show. So we'll see what happens with that. But it hurts it, but at the same time, again, you already had good fights on the prelims that you could help to build the main card still. You have Damian Maia, Matt Brown, which should be on the pay-per-view I get that they might keep that on the prelim main event, as they say, quote unquote. But you also have Thiago Santos and Nate Marquardt or Warley Alves, Brian Barberena that could open it out or something like that. And those are good fights. They really are. And so, this card is still stacked top to bottom, hands down. It's still a phenomenal card. It just might not be better than UFC 200 anymore because of it.
I agree. I think that I actually broke this down for Combat Press. I did a piece with Emma Shallon's toe to toe, and we talked about how I actually said the sleeper fight of the card is the main event because there were so many stacked cards. It's a sleeper in the sense that by the time you get to the main event, you almost forget that that's still a fight yet to happen because you'll have so many great fights leading up to it. So. Let's get into the card a little bit. I want to touch on Anderson real quick before that, and I'm going to go ahead and put on my conspiracy theory hat, Nick. I put it on occasionally. Gallbladder surgery. So I had an ex of mine who had gallbladder surgery, so I know sort of what leads up to gallbladder surgery and the pain that you have to deal with. But I also know that you recover from it fairly quickly. So all I'm saying, Nick, is that Anderson Silva could fight on UFC 200 in theory. Based on, depending on when he has gallbladder surgery. Gallbladder surgery is one of those things where once you need to have it, you have it soon. So he will probably have it within the next couple of days. So I don't know if GSP is doing anything July 9th. Anderson Silva seems like now he has some availability to fight. So that's not the kind of thing you throw together on short notice. But that's just a conspiracy theory, Nick. Okay, let's get to the card. Let's get to the card. Fabricio Verdum and Stipe Miocic at the top of this card. Listen, these are two guys that are incredibly underpromoted for the. And guess what? I just got an update from Bleacher Report. Anderson Silva to undergo surgery on Wednesday for the gallbladder. So, Nick, the updates are coming as we're talking. So. Yeah. Anyway, so Fabricio Verdum and Stipe Miocic, two super talented guys. Miocic more of a wrestler boxer. He's kind of an old school guy in that way. Verdum, obviously, he was a stud, absolute master on the ground. Then he went to King's MMA and turned himself into a striker, capable of taking out high-level guys with his hands. So even though these guys aren't drawing a lot of attention, what do you think about this fight? How do you see it?
Man, I don't. that as far as I really need to break it down a little more. I've kind of been caught up in all the news that's been going on. I haven't had a chance to do so yet. But when it comes to this fight on the feet, I think that Stipe has more power in his hands. I think he's, as far as boxing goes, he's the scarier guy to have to deal with in this fight. And for me, I really think that if this hits the mat, Stipe may want to wrestle. He may try to engage with him. That would be a huge mistake. Looking back on his fights that he has contested with guys on the mat, if he goes down there with Verdum, he is going to be in trouble. I mean, Stipe has shown that he's got decent wrestling. He can get in the, but he's not a guy that can really scramble into good positions. He's a guy that just offensively comes forward. He grinds you. He tries to, transition well and does all those things well. But when it comes to scrambles, when it comes to high-level scrambles, I don't think he's going to be able to hang in there with Verdum, and Verdum might actually catch him in something pretty wicked. So, it's a very tough fight to call. Verdum has underrated takedowns, man. I mean, he's capable of taking guys down, especially guys at his height. He's good at getting inside on the hips, especially for a guy that likes to, utilize the tie clinch. If he can get Stipe against the cage, I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to put him on his back. So for me, I really think that this fight is so unpredictable because it's a heavyweight fight, and anything can go when you got guys who have that type of power going up against each other. And so when you look at their skill for skill, Fabricio is the much more complete fighter. And I think that certainly if he can take it in all tangents of MMA in this fight, it favors him across the scorecard. So I favor the champion defending his title in this fight.
Yeah, I do as well. I think that's where Emma and I sort of parted ways. I think Fabricio will keep the belt. I think Stipe is a hell of a story. I think he's a hell of a good guy. I met him at Fan Expo. He's a good dude. And you sort of would like to see that narrative. Some people prefer, the titles to be on American soil. Certain types of fans, that doesn't really compel me one way or the other. I want the American fighters to represent our country well, but I don't care how many of them hold belts necessarily. That's not something I take particular pride in necessarily. But so I think I'm with you. I think that Verdum is the better. Pitched a little bit higher on all counts, and I agree with you that I think that if Stipe looks to wrestle with him, it's probably a bad idea. All right, moving down the card, we got Jacare and Vitor Belfort. For me, Jacare's been impressive lately. Both of these guys have juice with Luke Rockhold. Obviously, Vitor Belfort took his head off, and I think Souza lost a decision to him back at Strikeforce. So they both have a built-in promotable rematch should either of them win. For me, I like the narrative a little bit better of Vitor winning just because it allows the champion Luke Rockhold to potentially clean up a victory. So to me, that's a little bit more of a better promotional thing. I took Vitor. Sometimes I sort of lean towards the narratives. That's why you're here, because you break down fights, and I sort of look for stories and sort of fall into narratives sometimes. To my detriment, sometimes these narratives play themselves out. But when you look at Jacare and the Phenom, how do you see it?
Well, I mean, barring how this works promotionally for the, I mean, you have to think also, what if Weidman beats Rockhold? It's a very possible thing. I mean, that fight was close before, and so who knows what might happen in the next fight? Because then if Vitor wins, you have Weidman as champ. What happens then? I wouldn't be surprised if they decided to go with a Rockhold Weidman rubber match instead of giving Vitor the title shot.
Yeah.
So for me, I think that this fight, when it comes down to it, you have this is kind of a grappler versus striker matchup, because I mean, as good a striker as Jacare may be, it's still not very advised that he strike with Vitor. I mean, and you can say what you want about the TRT thing or whatever, what have you, that Vitor has kind of looming behind him in his past. I still would not at all think that it's a good idea for Jacare to want to keep this fight standing in any capacity, other than to try and mix up his hands to confuse Vitor enough to where he doesn't go in with any kind of insane blitz. And I think it certainly doesn't help for Vitor with his signature style of just getting in on guys just all crazy and stuff, because that could lead to Jacare getting a takedown or clinching up and finding a way to get it to the mat, which Vitor probably doesn't want to happen. I know Vitor is a black belt himself, but Jacare is a whole nother level of black belt for sure. You know what I mean? So, and Jacare is a strong dude, man. If Vitor allows Jacare to clinch with him, to grapple with him on the feet, I really think that Vitor's going to have a hard time muscling that guy off of him. No matter how strong Vitor is now, with or without TRT, that is a tough guy to have to deal with when it comes to any kind of grappling exchange, clinch involved. So for me, I really find that Vitor has to keep it really simple when it comes to his striking. Simple meaning that he just throws kicks, punches, combos, in and out, boom, boom, repeat. Because he can't really get too flashy with a guy like Jacare. He can't be throwing those spinning hook kicks or anything like that, because if he misses or if he finds himself off balance at any capacity, Jacare is going to swarm him, just throw his back onto the ground and go for an arm triangle or an arm or a leg lock or something. He will go for anything. He can do it all. So, I mean, this is a much more dangerous fight, I think, for Vitor, considering how high level Jacare is in all facets. I think I'm going to go with Jacare Souza here. Yeah,
I think the fight gets interesting when you talk about the scrambles. Vitor likes to get in there and get a little crazy. He likes to rush guys, get them nervous.
Oh, yeah.
Jacare's not too shabby in the scrambles, so I think that I do like Jacare, and I would like to see him sort of come to his full fruition after all these years of a big-time title shot and maybe even being a champ. So I wouldn't be heartbroken if Jacare were to win, and like you said, how Weidman wins, it throws my whole theory of the Vitor Rockhold narrative off. So, all right, let's move down the line, and I'm gonna kind of just get one or two sentences from you on some of these other fights. Just some thoughts. Chris Cyborg making her debut. It's at 140 pounds against a Leslie Smith. Is it a little too late for Cyborg? Was she always meant to sort of fight Ronda? How do you feel about this fight, just briefly?
Well, I mean, I like Cyborg coming in, fighting somebody at 140. I wouldn't have wanted it to be Leslie Smith. I heard they offered the fight to Jermaine Dorotamy, And I would have preferred to see that one. That one makes a little more sense. Jermaine's a much larger fighter. Leslie Smith is only in the UFC because she decided to fight at bantamweight. She is a flyweight. She fights at flyweight. When she was in Invicta, she fought at flyweight. Only coming into only joined the bantamweight division of the UFC because she took a short notice fight against Kaufman and did very well. Or it was a very exciting fight and they gave her another opportunity to fight. And then I think she knocked out Jessamine Duke afterwards. So since then, she's been somewhat of a mainstay on the roster thus far. But she's a flyweight, man. She is so much more smaller than Cyborg that I don't think people are going to get that until they face off at the weigh-ins. I think people are going to see them at the weigh-ins and go, oh, this is not okay. Because she's severely undersized in this fight. And so Cyborg couldn't have gotten an easier opponent, I don't think. I feel bad saying that because I never want to count somebody out. But when you look at a person who's just as devastating as Cyborg is, and you look at how severely undersized Smith will be coming into this fight, I think that they're just going to make a pretty highlighted example out of Smith as to what Cyborg can really do. And I mean, Smith is a person that's got heart. She's got a chin on her, and she's scrappy. I mean, she trains with a scrap pack, so I mean, what else can you expect? This will be interesting if Smith can make it competitive. I won't hold my breath on that, though. And I will definitely be putting down a couple of bucks in a parlay, probably pitting Cyborg to get a first-round knockout.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Cyborg, like you said, I think that the risk is you don't really want to put her in there with anybody that could beat her, because ultimately you want to see maybe Ronda regain her status. And the interesting thing that I put in the piece was that now that Ronda's no longer the champion, and I know there's money to be made with her elsewhere, but I wonder if Ronda would be open to a 140-pound fight with Cyborg now that she's no longer the champ and isn't bound by that 135 pounds. It'd be interesting because based on some of the pictures I've seen of Ronda, she's certainly closer to 140 pounds than she is to 135. Oh. So, listen, I'm not trying to take shots. I'm just saying, she needs to get her ass in shape. Anyway, next up, Shogun Rua against Corey Anderson. Shogun Rua in recent years has been sort of a guy who's putting other fighters over. Ovin St. Preux, I mean, obviously he's going in there to win, but they're putting Shogun in here with younger fighters to sort of bolster their resume should they win. Corey Anderson is cornered and coached by friend of the Sunday Morning Corner Man podcast, Mark Henry. He's sort of the coach of the hour right now. We know Corey's going to go in there with a game plan, much like Edson Barbosa, much like Frankie Edgar. These guys are going in there with higher level game plans. Can Corey Anderson come in with a game plan that defeats Shogun Rua? He's the favorite, I believe.
He should be. Rua's been in the game quite a while. He's had mixed results in his last few fights. But at the same time, man, Shogun Rua is now training with another coach of the hour these days, and Rafael Cordeiro. And now, Rafael is a guy who himself puts together fantastic game plans. His camp does, at least anyway. And I think that that's certainly something to pay attention to. I mean, Shogun, has only just now recently gone back to Rafael Cordeiro, because he had Rafael Cordeiro in the early years, I think all throughout his Pride career, and then changed it up, training somewhere else. And I forget the head coach's name at the time that he was training with, that he actually won the light heavyweight title with in the UFC. I forget his name, because really that was, I think, probably the highlight of that specific coach's career. But for him now to be with Rafael Cordeiro, that certainly could play a factor. That's a good coach to have behind you, no matter who you are at any point in your career. So I think it makes sense for this fight that Anderson would be the favorite, but I don't think people are giving Rua enough credit to where he's obviously just trying to still improve. Cordeiro cornered him in his first for the first time in a long time against Lil Nog, and while he struggled early because Lil Nog actually stunned him on the feet, and then Rua was able to maintain and get his bearings back, and then in the second and third rounds he just looked good. He looked good. I mean, he wasn't trying to headhunt like he generally does sometimes. He was actually trying to stay technical. He was trying to get in and out really well. He was trying to utilize his reach good, because he held a minor reach advantage in that fight, and he was actually utilizing it really well. And, of course, he incorporates leg kicks well in those combinations quite frequently. It makes it really hard to see what's coming. There's very few people that kick with passion like Hua does in the light heavyweight division. So, this is a much closer fight than I think people are making it out to be, just based off of who's in Hua's corner and his dedication to trying to maintain his striking superiority when he's in there against guys. And so, yeah, you're right though. I mean, Corey Anderson's a big dude. He could, he's good at grinding guys out at times, and this fight he may be able to do that. I do favor him to win the fight based on that specifically, but who knows, man? If Corey can't get him down, I think he's going to have a lot of trouble with Shogun on the feet.
I agree, and when you have a guy like Shogun Hua, and full disclosure, Shogun's one of my favorite fighters historically, but there's a reason why. When you have a guy like Shogun Hua, who not to sort of murder the 300 movie cliche, but a guy who's willing to dine in hell. I mean, he's willing to go there with it. He's willing to go to war, and again, that's an overwrought cliche as well, but he's willing to go there. And if you're not, he can still clip you, man, until he steps out of the cage for good. He's always going to be able to clip guys. Now the question becomes, how many guys are able to clip him? And that's the game you play. You get in there, and it's like, all right, I got this ticking time bomb. It's called my chin, and either you're going to find it and it's going to blow up on me, or I'm going to find you and you're going out. So that's kind of the game he plays these days. Chuck Liddell played that game late. A lot of guys play that game late in their careers, and that's where Shogun's at now. He's at, I hope I can get this guy's chin before he gets mine. So that becomes the question. So again, we talked a little bit about Corey Anderson being a slight favorite for you, and I use this term affectionately because I know a lot of you. For you degenerates out there, it's minus 230 on the money line for Corey Anderson, plus 180 for Shogun. So if you're looking to make a little extra, a couple extra dollars in your pocket, that's the way to go. So anyway, moving on. Let's hit the rest of this card real quick. Just in terms of, let's talk real quick about Damian Maia and Matt Brown. Two guys with very different styles, but based on how Damian Maia's been fighting lately, it's got to be an action fight, right, Nick?
I mean, man, Damian Maia has always, been this guy that has maintained his high-level skill in jiu-jitsu, and it's always been something that people feared. And in this fight, I really don't think it should be any different, especially for a guy like Matt Brown, who in the past, now he's a much different fighter, but in the past, he was susceptible to submission a lot. Not only in The Ultimate Fighter, but early on in his UFC career, where he was that guy like, man, he's going to get cut any day now. And now he's become one of these amazing welterweight contenders, but that's because he's been a guy who is willing to just go to absolute war to put you away. He really kind of, he calls himself a technical brawler, and the thing about that is the technical part that wasn't there before, and now it's there, and that's what makes him a dangerous guy on the feet, or if he's on top of you. And the thing about that is Damian Maia on the ground is dangerous off his back or on top of you or in the clinch even, because he somehow is able to find takedowns. His takedowns are so underrated these days because he was able to get Gunnar Nelson down like it wasn't anything. He got Ryan LaFleur down like it wasn't anything. He got Dong Young Kim, of all guys, down like it wasn't much. Rick Story. I mean, he's looked fantastic in this welterweight division. The only guy that ever was able to stifle his takedowns was Jake Shields, who, I mean, let's face it, that's a guy who's really hard to do anything to on the ground. And I believe that's it. I mean, anybody that can keep it standing with him has a good shot, because Damian Maia doesn't have this superb striking. It's decent. It's something that, I would say is almost underrated, because he's good at putting certain combinations together. He just doesn't have that power that gets people afraid of striking with him. You know what I mean? He's got that power in his hands where you just get hit and you're like, all right, if I could just take a few of these, because he can land them. He's somewhat accurate. And Matt Brown is a guy that will eat those shots and will keep coming forward. So that's what makes it a much more interesting fight. If Maia cannot get it to the ground, he is in for a very long or short night. Who knows? And I think, but like we saw, Matt Brown is susceptible to takedowns. We've seen guys take him down before. Johnny Hendricks, who's got great takedowns though. We've seen it all early in his fight. Chris Lytle was able to get him down. But again, I tell you, that was early on in Matt Brown's career. But Damian Maia, as I said, has great takedowns. I think he will be able to get Matt Brown down at times, and I think that he will be able to submit Matt Brown, probably in the later rounds, though. I think he's got to weather some early storm here with Matt Brown.
I agree. It should be an interesting fight. Damian Maia is sort of evolving himself as a fighter as he gets older. He was kind of a one-trick pony once upon a time, and he's starting to get a complete game. I don't know if he, like you said, he necessarily wants to stay on Matt Brown, but it'll be interesting to see. All right, let's move on. I want to touch. So what we're gonna do is I want to talk real quick about some UFC stuff. Then we'll move over to Bellator, a little bit of World Series of Fighting, and get on out of here. We gotta get this thing moving. So we're really thick this week because there's a lot going on. A really heavy show.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna talk to you about the UFC's 185-pound division real quick. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you 4 topics, and just give me a sentence on each. So first, Gegard Mousasi threw a little bit of shade at Lyoto Machida this week for some drug testing issues. What are your thoughts on that?
That's pretty funny. Only, he has his own thoughts about it. I'm sure that he was laughing a lot when that happened because he's been saying since their fight that there was something going on in that fight.
Luke Rockhold was dropped by Daniel Cormier in this is kind of a 205, kind of an 85 discussion. Luke Rockhold allegedly was dropped by Daniel Cormier in sparring. Cormier put it on blast on Twitter, to which John Jones, of course, called him a douche for it. And some fans were taking umbrage with AKA at the training methods, acting like nobody ever gets dropped in sparring, of course. But so that was the part that I found interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do find it odd that he would highlight that he was able to drop somebody in training. I mean, it is Luke Rockhold, and if you can drop that guy in training, that's pretty impressive. But why you would show that is kind of odd, and I mean, it certainly doesn't help Rockhold. It kind of puts him in a bad light. Not that there's anything wrong with it at the same time, but from when you're thinking about it, Daniel Cormier is the champ. You would want to believe that the guy like that is well-rounded overall. But again, Luke Rockhold is supposed to be known as this great striker, and if he's getting dropped by Daniel Cormier, a lot of people would come to this conclusion like, oh, he sucks on the feet or something, All
right, Vitor Belfort compared the Reebok deal to slavery or slavery wages, I guess, if you will. Anytime you invoke that sort of talk, it's probably a bad idea. When you first read that, what was your takeaway?
Well, I thought he was getting a little crazy, but for a guy that's losing out on millions, I don't blame him because I'd be pissed too if I was losing out on millions of dollars. Millions, I'd be freaking pissed too. And if he wants to compare it to something as drastic as that, when it comes to losing millions of dollars, I don't fault him, but yeah, he probably should have used different wording.
I'll say this, Nick, and I've been saying this for a while, and just to do a real quick shout out to the Periscope. The question was just posed about Dana White and talks to sell UFC. There is negotiations. I'm going to do a post-fight Periscope or a post-podcast Periscope. Stick around. I'll talk all about that here in a sec. As far as Belfort goes, listen, Nick, these guys need to figure out that when the Reebok deal came in, you got to figure out a different way to market yourself. Maybe you start to get active wear as opposed to, you see Dominic Cruz doing some stuff, you see Frankie Edgar doing some stuff. Create a brand that you can then promote on Twitter or Instagram. Felice Herrig is doing fine. Cowboy Cerrone is doing fine. These people have figured out the issue that the Reebok deal created, and they've moved around it. There's ways around this. They just have to figure it out. I'm not saying that's an excuse to make it that the Reebok deal is okay, but I'm just saying you can only complain about this so much. Either go out and start a union and get behind that, or figure your way around it. All right, lastly, in the 185-pound division, it has a new member. Rashad Evans looks to be moving to 185 pounds. We talked a little bit about this last week. Your thoughts?
I hope it happens. If he could do it healthily, it needs to happen, and I think it'd be a much needed refresher for him in his career if he's seriously considering it, and if he's serious about remaining a very high level competitor in mixed martial arts. I think it works. I like it.
All right, let's move on to Bellator. So Bellator has a event coming up as well. That is Bellator 154. Really a high profile main event. Phil Davis and
the rest
Muhammad,
of this card's kind of hurting.
What's that?
The rest of this card's kind of hurting. There's a few injuries that hurt it, so it's really only the main event there can be talked about. Karatanov was supposed to be on this card, and he dropped out of the card today, so it took a big hit.
Well, then let's talk Phil Davis and Mo Lawal. So Phil Davis, obviously a high-level wrestler. Mo Lawal, a high-level wrestler as well. They are not wrestling, obviously. They're fighting MMA. So I think Mo has really done a better transition from the world of wrestling to MMA. So I don't know. For me, I kind of like Mo in this. What are your thoughts?
I'm the other way. I like Davis. I think a lot of people have said, okay, well, yeah, the guy has power in his hands. He's a strong dude. Phil Davis isn't a strong guy in the sense that he's got power in his hands. He's a strong dude where if he works in the clinch, he's good at, manipulating the body a lot better in wrestling exchanges than I think King Mo is. I think King Mo's a guy that was just a power pack guy in his heyday when he was wrestling guys. And I mean, if we're honest, Phil Davis got to a higher level in wrestling than Muhammad did, which kind of makes the transition to MMA a little bit of an argumentative stance to have on who transitioned better, or Phil Davis or King Mo. And Phil, has much more acclimated submission skills than King Mo does on the mat, and that makes him dangerous. I mean, he's much more susceptible to attacking limbs, I guess you're more susceptible to get your limbs attacked by Phil Davis than you ever would be against King Mo in any fight. You're more susceptible to knockout for sure against King Mo. But lately we've seen Phil Davis, we've seen from him, and we saw it in the tournament, that he's certainly worked on his striking. To what extent, we don't know. This fight could be very telling of that. It's certainly more dangerous for Phil if he keeps it standing. And it's probably in his best interest to take it to where he feels most comfortable, which is probably on top, working a submission or something. So it'll be very interesting. Both guys are great at fending off takedowns. But also both guys are great at getting the takedown. This makes it a very interesting fight. But like I said, if it does remain standing, King Mo probably has the advantage. But I just think that Phil Davis's long reach, his body type, he's going to be able to manipulate King Mo against the cage a lot better than anybody else probably has against King Mo. And I think he'll be able to find takedowns from there and will likely find a submission or a TKO on the mat.
Yeah, I think, I like Mo on the feet, and I think you might be right. I mean, listen, Phil Davis, once upon a time, I think he submitted Gustafsson, so he's got some high level skills.
Alligator choke. I was so impressed by that. It was an anaconda choke that he caught him with.
Yeah, so he's got wins over high level guys. I mean, Magalhães, she beat Teixeira by decision. Machida, I mean, he's, like you said, I mean, listen, the guy's no slouch. I'm not trying to portray him that way. I guess I just thought coming in that he was going to be fighting for that belt sooner than later, and when it didn't materialize the way I thought it was going to, then I guess I sort of underrated him. But yeah, it could be a hell of a fight for Bellator. Okay, so let's move on to another issue in Bellator. Something kind of weird this week. So Scott Coker was talking about Dada 5000, and he had a kind of a weird statement. It was something along the lines, and I'll bring it up so I have it exact, but it was something along the lines of, maybe it's just that just better if Bellator and Dada 5000 are friends. Friends are good. Let's just be friends. Yeah. Friends are forever, kind of a thing. In lieu of the peril that Dada 5000 was in, following his fight with Kimbo Slice and during his fight with Kimbo Slice, and what role Bellator may have played in that, how do these comments sit with you?
I mean, it makes sense. It really does. When you have a guy that fights a fight like that, almost dies, almost puts your promotion in jeopardy, kinda, sorta, it makes sense. And Dada's not this guy that's just supposed to be fighting anybody else other than Kimbo Slice. You don't put him in there with any other heavyweight that has experience, that has, actual, high-level training. I think it makes sense to want to not have to affiliate him any further, which sucks because obviously it's a one-and-done thing putting him in there. But based on how the fight looked, it makes total sense to me. You definitely want to let Dada do his own thing, and maybe if he's serious about competing in MMA, let him build a record, let him do what he's got to do to, at least, make it make sense for him to fight in Bellator, World Series, or anywhere else that has a brand name like those promotions.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that I don't know, just the whole way Bellator has handled this is just not that doesn't sit well with me.
I don't like it either. But it makes at the same time they don't want to have to deal with another possible death. You know what I mean?
No. Here's my thing. I don't think that they should have him fight for them. I just think that they're putting too much distance between them and him, and I think that they should be embracing him more in terms of his well-being and his health. It almost is. It's kind of a lawyery thing a little bit, the way they're putting distance. I just think they're setting themselves up for if Dada ever goes after them for negligence or anything. I don't know. It's just the whole thing, just the whole Dada 5000 in Bellator situation from the first day to the last day is just all shit to me. I just want nothing to do with it on a bunch of levels. All right, there were some fight announcements this week. None, however, as high profile, in my opinion, as the rematch that is set for World Series of Fighting 32, Marlon Moraes versus Josh Hill. That's turning into a good little card. So they got Moraes and Hill. They got Ivanov and Copeland, and then they got the Fodor brothers fighting together. So this is going to be a hell of a card for World Series of Fighting. What did you think when you saw that Moraes Hill fight?
Well, first of all, real quick correction. I think Ivanov Copeland fight is on World Series of Fighting 31, but
what's the
it still has two title fights.
No, it's the Palmer Almeida fight. That was the other. That was the other title fight. I knew there was two title fights. So Palmer Almeida, Hill Moraes is the headliner, and then the Fodor brothers. So I appreciate that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I like the fight. Hill gave him his most competitive fight since Moraes has been champion, and Hill has won 4 straight since that loss. Not that they were anything too crazy other than his actual victory inside a World Series of Fighting where he took on a 16-0 Russian fighter. I cannot pronounce his name and I don't remember it, so I can't say it. I apologize. But he looked impressive in that fight. And so, at the same time, it's kind of hard to justify the Chris Valencia getting the title shot after the very close fight that he had at World Series of Fighting 28 right underneath Moraes' fight against Barajas. So I prefer that one. And, at the same time, I think it makes sense because Moraes had a competitive fight with Hill in that matchup. And I think if they rematch, we're going to see one of two things. We're going to see either another competitive, fun fight, or we might actually see how much Moraes has improved since that fight. Or we could also see if Hill maybe has impressed him or improved himself and maybe gets the title and pulls off an upset. So there are a lot of ways that thing could go. And so I like that rematch. Another rematch that was actually signed to just today, TJ Dillashaw takes on Rafael Sunsao at UFC 200. So they're building that card up even more. And I like that rematch. I didn't think because Sunsao won the first time around. I thought it was a very close fight, yes, but I did say that back then that TJ Dillashaw won that fight. So I am excited to see that rematch as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this card. I mean, especially that the Hill Moraes fight, both title fights actually. For me, the interesting part about the Hill fight was there was kind of a little bit of a rumor that Ali Abdelaziz had put Josh Hill sort of on the shelf because he fought so well against Marlon Moraes. So now that he's out of the company, I don't know if that affects this rematch sort of being booked or not. But he, like you said, Hill is the guy that really gave Moraes the most trouble since he's been in the promotion. So it'll be interesting to see if it's going to be a situation where Moraes or Hill sort of stays away and makes Moraes chase him. Moraes is one of those guys who deals well counter fighting, and I mean he can push the action as well, but he's a good counter fighter and he likes to be pushed a little bit, and Hill just didn't give him enough to really work with in the first fight. So it'll be interesting to see those guys rematch. All right, some good news. In a really bad situation, it looks like the person who's responsible for the death of Jordan Parsons has been brought to justice, allegedly. When you saw this, Nick, did this, you're only going to get so much closure, or you're only going to get so many smiles necessarily when you lose a guy, and then the person's ultimately brought to justice. How'd you feel when you saw the reports that the hit and run assailant, I guess you will, had been brought to justice, allegedly?
Well, yeah, it's hard to say. I felt happy. I felt, when I say happy, I guess all I really felt was glad that his family can maybe get closure out of this. My biggest fear out of this whole thing was that the guy that did this was going to get away with it, and that would have probably been the worst case scenario. So as long as that doesn't happen, that's good as long as justice is served, and as long as this is a guy, as long as they can prove without a doubt that this was the guy. And from the report, it does look like it was the guy. The car matches the description of the one that hit Parsons. The mirror was missing on it. It really, as far as what evidence has been presented to the public, it certainly looks like it was this guy. So I hope that is the case. And, I hope at the end of the day, if, that he gets tried and whatever sentence gets befallen onto him, it's a fair one that makes sense, that fits the crime. He took a life, hands down. That's exactly what happened. So no matter what they decide to do, I hope it matches that specific punishment.
I agree. I mean, obviously it's good that, like you said, the family can potentially get some closure. All right, that's not the kind of note we want to end on typically, but this has been a super heavy show. A lot to talk about. There's a lot more to talk about. As always, get on the MMA Discussion Facebook page, like it. Get on there, talk about what you want to hear from us. There are a few things I wanted to get to. Canelo Khan, financial implications, a little about Combat the Americas. We didn't get to it this week, so maybe I'll do some one-off stuff for the site. Just me talking about it, just to kind of to give some highlight to those two things. So that's pretty much it. Nick, you got any final words? What's exciting you for the week coming?
198, please watch it. It's going to be amazing. 154, it sucks that the Karatanov got taken off that card. Really, the only thing on that card worth watching is the King Mo Muhammad Law versus Phil Davis fight. So, along with 198, you're getting your fair share of MMA this weekend. I'm excited for it, and I just appreciate everybody that's been watching. If you guys are watching right now, we appreciate you. Share this if you enjoyed what we were talking about. And again, we will be on Facebook Live to talk about anything that we did miss.
Absolutely. So that does it for another MMA Discussion podcast. It's in the books. For Nick Peralta, this is John Franklin. Guys, we'll be back next week. We're trying to move the podcast up a little bit in the week so that you guys can chop it up earlier. Again, as Nick says, as I say all the time, get on the Facebook page, like it. Let us know what you guys are thinking. Let us know what kind of stuff you want to talk about. We'll do a better job of interacting with the fans and kind of giving a heads up as to what the topics are going to be, so you guys can then chime in, and we'll do a more a fan interactive piece moving forward. So again, last time for Nick Peralta, this is John Franklin. Guys, have a good week. Enjoy the fights. I'm gonna go back to something I used to say in my old podcast to end them. Keep your chin down and your gloves up. This was the MMA Discussion podcast. See you next week.